I could turn the mic on too. All right. What's up, everybody? Today, you can see we're in a little bit of a different background. This is just the small intro that I'm going to be doing for the video that should be coming out in a week or so, I would say, from whenever we're recording this. It's Friday midday. So what's going to be happening is that we're going to be going to a cottage in slightly northern Quebec, and what I wanted to document with this video mainly is the phenomenon of white boy summer. What does it mean? Where does it come from? And overall, what does it mean to be, part of Canadian culture and part of French Canadian culture as a whole? Because I feel like as society has progressed, especially over the past few decades, with the advent of demographic changes and political ideologies changing, Canada has felt more divided than ever, and that's a phenomenon that's been seen throughout many Western countries like America and like in Europe. And what I want to take us back to a time when, Canadian ideals, Canadian ideology, and Canadian culture especially has taken hold of us. So I want to bring us back to a time when, and explore really what does Canadian culture entail, and especially, something that we're losing, because with this idea of this post-nationalist culture that we've invented through mass migration, we've lost a certain aspect of who we really are. So I want us to see, when you go to different countries, what you want to see are different cultures. You don't want the entire world to look the exact same. And that's been basically the main idea that I've been advocating for in all the previous episodes. We can talk about mass migration, we can talk about demographic change, and then everyone can call me a racist or a xenophobe or whatever, but it was never about race. We shouldn't be having immigrants from any country, in my opinion, but it's not a race-based system. I don't want any Europeans as much as I don't want any Africans or Chinese, right? What I want is a preservation of the Canadian identity, the Canadian heritage, and the Canadian culture. So, please bear with us over the next, I don't know how long this video will be, but over this video, and we hope you enjoy. Now, we've begun our journey exiting the suburbia and modern suburban sprawl of the Montreal area. And this is easily characterizable by the large amounts of concrete, expansive roads, large factories and stores, mega box stores, fast food, all along these highways. And it becomes increasingly obvious that to anyone who's actually paying attention is that we critically lack green spaces and just nature in general. Not only that, you begin to start noticing how far apart everything is and how soulless it all feels, because there's no way to have any interaction with anybody, maybe except the cashier or a few chit-chats with people. But most of the time, you get there with your car, you leave your car, you go to the store, you get whatever, and you're back in the car and you drive home. Where's the sense of community? Getting out a little bit further away from the city, you notice quite quickly how the terrain and the environment changes drastically. You go from urban sprawl and suburbia to farmland, and you go to a little bit more of a rural and traditionalist lifestyle, which is a very nice treat, especially for people who live in the city and who don't get the chance to see how immaculate most of this place is. It's a rare treat to be able to leave and just go look at farmland or even drive by farmland, because nobody usually thinks about that. We don't normally think, where does this food come from in the grocery store? No, we just get it and you eat it, and that's it. And then you watch Netflix. But these are the people who live out here, who have lived out here. Their families have owned these farms for generations, and they're the ones who are putting in the work for not that much pay. These people deserve a lot more money than what they're doing it for. But they're here to preserve the culture, and they're here to put out a product that you don't even appreciate, but that literally fuels your life. Anyways, we finally entered back into basically the last piece of civilization before we get to our cottage destination, which is slightly more remote. We stopped in the IGA at Morin Heights to pick up a few supplies. The groceries we picked up were very expensive, like most grocery prices are, and that's slightly exacerbated by the fact that we were even further off from civilization than normal. Now, I don't want to make it seem like we're out in the middle of nowhere, but these smaller towns, especially up in the Laurentians, perfectly encapsulate what a more traditional rural and historical lifestyle is, especially in this area of Quebec, which has a very specific culture and is met with very specific types of people who have grown up in the area. Without even them knowing, or maybe they do know it, they're essentially some of the last people in this region that are carrying on the tradition of their ancestors that has been going on and being passed down generation to generation for the past centuries. This is not something you're going to see in downtown Montreal. This isn't something you're going to see in Quebec City or in a lot of these other places, because a change in demographic leads to a change in culture. After nearly 2 hours of car travel and a lot of traffic, we have finally arrived to our destination. An absolutely beautiful, not only trip and route that we took, but also just the current landscape we're looking at. Alright guys, we're over here at Lac des 16 in Quebec after a 2-hour car ride. Finally here. Absolutely immaculate looking here. We're right on the beach. We're right on the water. This is what it all means. This is the main marina for the entire lake and serves as a small hub where you bring all your boats. You can offload and onload whatever materials or whatever foods or whatever supplies that you need to bring to your cottage. Something that's very interesting and definitely intriguing is that a lot of these cottages, and especially the one we went to, are not accessible by roads, essentially. There are some slight small paths, but mainly the way to transport yourself to and from is by boat, which was very fun and honestly a very big change, because have you ever imagined something where you can't go by car or by bus or by any road transportation? No. It's right on the edge of the water. Very nice. Alright guys, we're over here. We're at the cottage. Very beautiful car ride. It's very beautiful over here. This is truly what Quebec and Canada is all about. As we were driving, we obviously saw the progression. I don't know if I filmed it properly, but we saw the progression of the landscape changing from, an urban environment to a more rural environment, and then to what I would call the majority of Quebec, which is extremely rural, extremely beautiful province, So we're over here at the water, and we've finally begun White Boy Summer. All right, guys, we're over here on the lake, night 1. Got Quebec beer, as you know, so we keep it full Quebecois. Anyways, a few thoughts on the road trip. Very, very nice. The landscape's truly immaculate. But I just wanted to talk about, there were some municipalities that really interested me, because you look at a lot of these rural towns now, once you go further out, a lot of them are like mixed use developments. They're mixed use zoning. So right next to the general store, you have people's houses, then you got a cemetery, you got the church. And I think it's a much better way to do it than modern suburbia, where you have all your cars in the suburbs and then you got to go places and then you want to kill yourself because it's awful. Over here, it's a lot more peaceful. The only problem is that, you know, these areas, after long enough periods of time, I don't think they're gonna have the demographics to support continuing protecting these areas, because they're such sparsely populated. A lot of the young people end up moving out to bigger cities in order to find, you know, better opportunities. And then what happens, these places become vacuums, and these vacuums are inhabited by old people. And then once they have to go, what's going to happen to these places? I don't know, and I'm scared about it. Another thing I've much noticed, the more north you go, the more out of the city you go, the more the ethnicities change. We went to an IGA, which was absolutely packed, and guess what we saw? Zero brown people, zero black people. Okay, it was all French Canadians. It was all vrais Québécois, which was very interesting, you know. But to be fair, on the way here, we saw a bunch of Mexicans in the fields working the corn. That's how a lot of this happens. A lot of these farms now, because the kids are gone, because, you know, they can't afford the machinery or whatnot, what they do is they hire cheap literal Mexican labor, fly them over for the summer, have them work, and then they leave, and then that's how it works. Do I like this type of economy? No. Would I want to see more young Canadians and young Québécois people end up going to this beautiful landscape behind me? Obviously. I think most people love it here. I'm already here for like 10 minutes. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a much more peaceful life out here. You know, culture is something that's very hard to define, but generally what it boils down to is people. And the problem that Canada's facing is that as we change the people, the culture fundamentally changes, and therefore the land loses its identity. The people who've been living in these cottages have been passed down for generations and generations. But what happens when the birth rate declines so much that there's no longer anybody to be passed down to? So what happens? These cottages are sold, and then large corporations scoop them up and sell them as rental properties so that rich Chinese and Indian families can buy up properties that have been in people's families for hundreds of years. This is one of the problems with our demographic changes. Because nobody's having children, nobody wants to put in the time, and the economic situation is so bad that nobody can afford to inherit these places and maintain these cottages. So what happens? They'll be abandoned, they'll be sold, they'll be rented out, and the entire area will lose not only its culture, but its history, its heritage, and the people who have lived here forever. What's up, guys? We're on a paddle boat.
I love you guys.
Okay. With my brewski as usual. Oh, okay. Nope, we're going the wrong way. Anyways.
Whoopsies.
So I wanted to continue the conversation about, you know, the demographic change that's happening. And one of the big issues is that you're gonna lose a lot of the culture that's surrounded around this place. You know, we went to this IGA, right? And I said, you know, there were no brown people, it was all white people. And what really interested me was that, you know, the few immigrants that were there was our cashier was some Chinese lady. She spoke perfect French. She had the full Quebecois accent, even as an Asian person, even speaking in French. She was working with all the employees. And by the way, all the employees weren't like 80-year-old guys, okay, from India. They were actual college students who lived in the town, which is what it should be. I don't understand why all the fast food people have to be like 50-year-olds. So the big issue is that, like, you know, we want to talk about protected culture and what does it mean to have Canadian culture? And that's, again, what I want to fundamentally find over these few days that we're out here in the wild. And I think there's definitely an aspect of Quebecois culture that has to do with this rural area, this rural environment around the water. And like, as you can see, we got a boat going. Let's go. They waved at us. So there's definitely this rural aspect of Quebecois culture that takes its roots in, you know, in hunting and farming with the land. You know, it was part of the Iroquois culture that we were able to integrate with the Iroquois, and they were able to integrate with us. It was almost a symbiotic relationship. And we all wanted to, and now we're moving on the waves. And we want to always talk about how, like, you know, the Europeans absolutely, you know, murdered and destroyed the culture of the natives. Well, no, a lot of them intermarried. A lot of them, most Indians or the Native Americans who live today are descendants of European and indigenous mixes. So part of our culture is part of indigenous culture, and the same goes both ways. That's just one thing I found. I want to bring a few more updates later on. Notice all the Ukrainian flags. I find that very interesting. I don't know what that's about. All right, we're out here on the boat. Another important factor of Canadian or Quebec culture that I've realized, of white people culture, is that because of a large majority of white people, where do they live? Well, they live in either Europe and America. Most of them live in the Northern Hemisphere, where we have these, raging winters. We got the gun over here. Where they have these raging winters and cold weather that lasts for a large majority of the year. Obviously, I don't mean the south of America. Obviously, I mean, the northern countries like most of Europe. And so when summer comes around, they like to party. Summer is such an important aspect of the culture because most of the year, it's too cold to do anything. So when the summer comes out, people go out, we go on the water, we like to fish. Even in the winter, we like to fish. That's how much fishing is part of the culture. So this is another aspect that we're looking at. For all 3 days that we were over there, the weather was beautiful, even though it was raining in Montreal. But the lake was very warm, especially on the second day. So we went out swimming. It was an absolutely beautiful beach, or rock beach, where we were able to dive off of it. We were able to see some fish. Overall, just a very nice and well kept up and clean lake. There's something about burning gas that's just ultimately Canadian. We love having that burnt gas, It's part of the culture. We like having big motors. We like having the ski-doos, the sea-doos. We like having the four-wheelers. We like having the boats. Something that burns gas. For some reason, it's part of the culture, and we love it. It's expensive, but keeping up part of the culture is expensive. Fundamentally, that's what it means. You don't care about how much it costs because you're in the most beautiful place on the planet. There's very few places that are this beautiful. We're right next to the water. The weather's beautiful. It's perfect. We got a cottage. Everything's super nice. Lac des Saisils. Driving here, there's a million lakes. Look, there's even a canoe club going on right now. And it's all part of the culture. Again, when we talk about culture, it's like, what does it mean to have a culture? It's the people. What do the people do all day? They like their boats. They like their food. And that's what it means.
What the fuck?
Now, where does the phrase white boy summer come into all of this? White boy summer originally was just meant to be this playful saying that came about when you take pride in the fact that in a lot of these Western countries, actually most, if not all Western countries, the majority of the population for a very long period of time has been a overwhelming majority of white. The term white boy summer is just allowing people to take pride in their heritage. And I don't want to keep saying culture because you've definitely heard it enough, but in fact, the culture. But now you have all these groups that are calling and saying, hey, you can't say that anymore because that's meant to represent white supremacy and white power or white nationalism. According to the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, quote, the slogan has been transformed into a rallying cry for white supremacist groups who are using it to spread propaganda, recruit members, and incite violence against marginalized communities. According to Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, the phrase white boy summer was coined in early 2021 by actor Chet Hanks, son of Tom Hanks, in a song presumably meant to capitalize on the similarly named trend Hot Girl Summer and Christian Girl Autumn. Hank attempted to clarify that his target audience was not Trump, NASCAR-type white people, and that white boy summer cannot include anything related to ill will or prejudice towards anyone from a different background, race, or walk of life than you. However, merchandise sold at Hank's website was criticized for employing Gothic-style font common to white supremacists, with eerie similar to the Frankfurt fonts infamously used on the cover of Hitler's Mein Kampf. On May 20th, 2024, Chet Hanks announced on his Instagram page that he consulted with the heavens, felt a westward breeze, and walked outside the strip club and saw my shadow. There will be a hashtag White Boy Summer. This story of how an influential person with a large social media audience can inspire a viral and dangerous narrative and motivate white supremacist group worldwide. The far right is adept at bringing their hateful ideologies into the mainstream, especially through the use of social media. The already viral White Boy Summer has proved to be the perfect segue for them to spread their bigotry to a wider audience. Overall popularity of the term by these groups is steadily growing even during other seasons. Use of the term for propagandizing, organizing events, and recruiting new members has spread transitionally, including use of the term for propagandizing, organizing events, and recruiting new members has spread transnationally, including in Australia, Austria, Canada, Finland, France, Germany, Netherlands, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States. So what they're trying to say is that you cannot say White Boy Summer because it's used for hate. Now, why is that one the only exclusive one you can't use? We can say Black Lives Matter. You could say all the other things that you want to say. That diversity is king. And it all ties into a single phenomenon. And it all comes down to one thing, where when white people have even the slightest bit of pride towards their heritage or contentment with who they are and who their people are, everyone assumes that automatically they're white nationalists, racist bigots that hate every other race. It's never been about that, and it may be in some small extremist groups, obviously. But the vast majority, and I don't want to make this a main issue, but the vast majority of the time that this phrase is used is just to represent a culture and a people that have been underrepresented, especially in the last 10 years, by not only the media, but every corporation on the planet, and by just the community at large. When the country, like Canada, has expressed vividly and constantly that you cannot be proud of who you are, not only as just a white person, but as a Canadian, or as an American, or as a Brit, or as a French, because that harms minority groups, or that harms immigrants. It almost seems like they have this ulterior motive. It almost seems like they have this plan to demoralize you and to make you think that, no, there is no national identity in Canada. No, French-Canadian culture isn't this independent group of people with a set of ideals and a set of shared heritage. No, that doesn't exist. You can just take one person from one country and bring them to another country, and they'll all be the same. There is no overarching theme or heritage to tie all of this together. Now, another thing that's super easily observable, especially at these cottage type places, is the fact that housing prices have drastically increased over the last several decades, which we already know is because of immigration, even though nobody wants to mention it. But especially in a lot of these places where people love to escape, and as the urban sprawl continues and as urbanism continues, people want to find escapes, and one of the best ways to escape is to buy a cottage a few hours out of town that's readily accessible and that you can go to every summer, and you can essentially stay there for as long as you'd like, barring any weather event. But when we were talking with the owners of the cottage, something that stood out to me especially was the price at which they bought it. They told us in 1907 that cottage was bought for a few $1,000s. And now it could easily be sold for over $500,000. Now, this is a travesty because it used to be a staple. Having a cottage used to be a staple of the culture because you'd want to escape the town, especially a few years back where, a lot of these cities were a lot less beautified and there was a lot less green spaces in the areas. So you would have to go to a cottage to escape. And the people who currently live at this cottage. They say they live there every summer, essentially, for the entirety of the summer, and then leave. They come back to suburbia once the water freezes up and they're no longer able to transport themselves in and out of the lake because, again, there is no road, and also because there's no heating infrastructure and the cottages aren't built to sustain large amount of people living there and heat being produced in the winter. As our 3-day vacation came to a close, at least for that segment of the vacation before we began our trek home, being outside in nature and being in this new type of environment gives you really a new perspective on not only what it means to be in a beautiful country like Canada and in a place like Quebec, but gives you a new idea of how to live. Because the people who've lived here not only have lived here for generations and generations and have the history, the feeling, and the idea of what it means to populate an environment like this, but also have a completely different mentality than those who live even in suburbia or downtown, for example. Because when you go downtown and your only green space that's available is a small park that's a few meters squared in area, it's a much different environment completely. Being surrounded by the lake, being surrounded by the trees, and even being attacked by mosquitoes and horseflies, it makes you feel like you're more alive and you're more connected to the nature and to the earth. Overall, it humbles you seeing the vastness of the lake and the vastness of the forests and how inconsequential and small you feel, even though humans have completely ravaged the environment around us. But this environment has been kept up, it's been kept pristine, it's been kept beautiful, and it's been kept nearer to its roots. Our hosts were also telling us a story about what had happened a few years earlier at the lake, where a landslide caused by the snow and the weather led to a landslide on the side of one of the hills, and that completely wiped out one of the cottages, and all the debris from the hill ended up falling onto the iced up lake and caused ricochets and a mini tsunami of water that ended up affecting nearly a dozen other cottages, even on the other side of the lake and next to it. It takes a long time to rebuild a lot of these areas because these are generational cottages and not necessarily owned by people who are extremely wealthy. So once in a lifetime of weather event like this happens, your entire livelihood and your entire life at this lake and at this cottage can be wiped out in an instant, where it's almost impossible for you to rebuild it because you do not have the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are required to renovate, keep up, and rebuild a cottage like this. So it's important that we continue to protect these spaces and that we continue to not harp on climate change, because that was not the issue, everybody. Climate change was not the issue. That was a once in a lifetime weather event that happened that ended up wiping out, and there were some negative consequences. But then continuing on this idea of housing prices increases, some of these cottages are worth millions of dollars because they're in prime real estate, and that there's still a demand, and it shows that people still want to get out of the city. They still want to live this traditional lifestyle. Even though we may not admit it, a lot of people love it and a lot of people long for it. And now that I'm back, and now that we're back into the city and live normal life relatively, you do feel this longing for going back to this environment. And even a month out of the year, a few months out of the year, would definitely satiate this need. And it gets us away from our job. You don't think about working. You don't think about politics as much. Maybe I do, but that's because I love it and I love the game. But you feel a lot more at peace. White Boy Summer, when it originated, might not have included other races, or might have just been a calm little saying that Chet Hanks came up with. And I don't necessarily believe that White Boy Summer excludes any other race. It was never about race. It's just something that has been closer to the lives and to the history and to the heritage of white people, white Canadians, white Europeans, is something like this, going out to the cottage. It is not something that somebody in India or China necessarily knows as well or has as much in their blood. I'm not saying that nobody can do it, and there's definitely examples of black people, Asian people, brown people who have lived in this country and have lived in these types of countries for several generations, own cottages, and know to a certain extent, but fundamentally what it comes down to is that someone with the lineage of European heritage, English, French, Irish, whatever, will have a better grasp on what it means and how it feels to go and partake in these events. White Boy Summer, again, is just an overarching theme, I believe, and not an explicit action or reaction to other ethnicities or races. But what it comes down to is a protection of the Canadian heritage and of the European background. You feel at home and you feel proud to be who you are, and I believe that the actions taken forth by the government and by the media to put down white people and claim that they're all racist, they're all bigots because of certain things that might have happened to some of their ancestors, and that the idea that we cannot be proud of who we are because therefore it's racist, I think in itself is racist. And White Boy Summer is reclaiming that belief that white people can have a culture, that Canadians can have a heritage, and that no one else can take it away from us. Finally, on our way back home, we decided to stop at the popular ski resort location, Mont Saint-Sauveur, located in the Laurentian region of Quebec. During the summer, they turn it into a water park. And after struggling to try and open the locker for several minutes, we finally got into the most overpriced, overcrowded, and overall one of the worst water parks I've ever been to in my life. It was way too small, with very little rides. I believe there were less than 10 actual water slides. It was unbelievably expensive, and it was so packed that there was not a single water slide that did not have over an hour and a half long wait. All the pathways were made of just black asphalt that completely burnt your feet because the sun was shining. We ended up going on a total of 2 rides for the 4 hours that we were there. The lazy river, and then not even a water slide, a type of luge toboggan, bobsled type of ride. Overall, just one of the worst experiences of my life. No, that's obviously an exaggeration, but one of the worst water parks I've ever been to. And already I'm not a fan of water parks. And just overall, it seemed like it was just a money grab. Because in the winter, the Saint-Sauveur ski resort is one of the most popular in the Laurentians. I'm very familiar with the area as I'm an avid snowboarder, but whatever they did over this summer, it was not great. It was way too packed. And what is it with Indian people wearing water shirts? I don't get that. But anyways. Another thing you start to notice, especially at these areas where a lot of skin is exposed, is just how disgusting people are. How much we've become a degenerate, disgusting, fat slob of a society. There are fat people everywhere. There are people with tattoos all over their body. There are people just out and about looking gross. And it really goes to show how far we've fallen from the days where you go to the beach and everyone used to be attractive and at least thin, or at least somewhat healthy. Now these fat slobs are everywhere, and it's just disgusting. And I don't even want to, really critique this because I'm not, let's say, the healthiest person, but at least put a little bit of effort in how you look, or at least start to care a little bit about your body and your health, because this is outrageous. If you're 300 pounds at a water park, there's a problem. Now, this video wasn't meant to become all preachy and gay, but I just really wanted to show off what it feels like to try and reclaim part of your heritage and part of your culture, something that a lot of these normies will never do in their lives. And I'm just here to say you should try and explore and find out who you are, because there's a reason why we have distinct cultures, why there are different countries. Everyone grows up and has a different life situation. From North America to Asia, it's completely different. It's literally two different worlds. But the effects of globalization and mass immigration are becoming a massive threat to ways of life that have been historical to peoples for the past several centuries. And I'll tell you right now, nobody's going to India to go and, change their culture. It's only that the greatest countries, the Western countries, founded by European domination, are the only countries being affected by this right now. America, Canada, Great Britain, France, most of Europe. And it's interesting to see how nobody is allowed to complain about it because you're a racist, because we have to accept diversity. But what about our culture? What about our heritage? What about reclaiming what it means to go out on a lake and just fish? Anyways, I feel like this video is getting a little preachy, and that wasn't really my intention. It was just supposed to be me thinking out an idea about my small vacation over the summer. I just really wanted to show and document a little part of what it means to be Canadian. And again, you do whatever you want in the summer. I just wanted to show off what I would call a little bit more traditional summer adventure at a cottage at a lake in somewhat northern Quebec. But again, if anyone's offended, I don't really care, and this is just me on my vacation. So imagine me normally. No, I'm kidding, but in all reality, this is something that I think several people can actually identify with, and I think is a little bit more common than we'd like to think. But this video is getting a little bit long, and I think you've seen most of what happened, and the rest is just a car ride home and getting really sunburnt. Anyways, thank you as always for listening, and I hope you enjoyed. Stay Canada first, stay Canada one.